Step into the shadows and welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a deep dive into the incredibly rich, dark cosmos of the uncanny diatribe. We're going to be unraveling a grim, dark Gothic fable, one that completely strips away literally everything you thought you knew about heroes and villains. We're looking at the grand, sweeping tragedy of a fallen empire. But more importantly, we are examining the unseen cosmic orchestrator who engineered the whole shebang from the shadows.
It's a genuinely terrifying concept, right? Think about it. What if the architect of your absolute total ruin was actually your closest, most trusted advisor? What if your suffering isn't just some random, unfortunate accident of the universe? What if your absolute downfall was actually a deliberately orchestrated crucible meant entirely for your own growth? Because in the lore we're exploring today, the collapse of a kingdom isn't just a tragic mistake, it's a meticulously designed weapon of evolution.
Section 1 is the Wagnerian illusion, or salvation as fertilizer for a grave.
To really grasp this universe, we have to shatter a very comforting lie. We as humans love to cling to the illusion of the Wagnerian redemption narrative. You know the one. It's the classic myth we all know and love where an external savior arrives, purity is magically preserved, and a shiny hero saves the world from destruction. But in this fable, that is a complete lie. This universe operates entirely on the harsh reality of the Nietzschean sovereign free spirit, and this philosophy dictates the true spiritual mastery absolutely demands intense evolutionary friction. Nobody swoops in to save you. You only experience true, internal spiritual rebirth through the terrifying crucible of absolute ruin.
And that brings us to the sinister mastermind behind it all, the alchemical spirit of becoming. This is our cosmic orchestrator, and he fundamentally understands that chaos and order literally cannot be balanced without massive devastation. He isn't interested in saving anyone, not at all. His only goal is continuous evolution. He recognizes that true spiritual balance demands intense friction. He knows that to build the new, you must completely and utterly destroy the old.
Moving into Section 2, the Golden Masquerade, the rot beneath the green.
So when the alchemical spirit of becoming first arrives in the sun-drenched courts of the old empire, he doesn't show up as a monster. He appears as an advisor, a jester. To the common folk, his green attire looked like the verdant color of life in springtime. But if you looked closely, it was a green that had begun to rot at the edges, like the moss growing over a crumbling monument. His presence was definitely not a sign of springtime rebirth. It was a visual signal of a creeping infection. His green was fertilizer for a grave, not a garden.
To actually execute his dark design, the spirit of becoming sheds that whimsical green identity entirely and embraces a terrifying new form, the Gold Demon. This glittering, incredibly deceptive, and calculating entity is a masquerade he adopts specifically to infiltrate the royal court. By playing the role of the Gold Demon, the true jester is able to act as the puppeteer of ruin, masterfully pulling the strings and manipulating the earthly sovereign's massive ego right from the shadows.
This brings us to Section 3, a Faustian descent, whispers of the puppeteer.
The destruction here was meticulously planned out step by step. First, the jester infiltrates the court as a trusted advisor. Then, under the guise of enlightenment, he feeds the sovereign's insatiable thirst for forbidden knowledge. Step 3 is where it gets really insidious. He whispers counterfeit prophecies, presenting normal courtly betrayals and negative interactions as necessary friction for the king's spiritual mastery. He validates the king's ego-driven hubris. And finally, step 4, he engineers a cataclysmic downfall entirely from the shadows, ensuring the empire collapses right on schedule.
The sheer genius of the Gold Demon was how he anchored the king into this dark philosophy. He actually twisted the very concept of continuous evolution just to justify the king's reckless hubris. The sovereign was manipulated into confusing his worldly dominance with a divine right. He genuinely believed that the destructive path he was on was somehow a higher destiny.
So the sovereign's tragic missteps were just absolute. He believed a completely false destiny. He blindly chased those counterfeit prophecies straight down into the underground. And worst of all, guided by the jester's influence, the king actually began to see the literal ruin of his own people as the only true path to a higher state of being. Every single royal act turned into calculated devastation. He was being walked right to the edge of the cliff, and he thought he was learning how to fly.
Now for Section 4, the chthonic abyss, the push into darkness.
When the moment of absolute collapse finally arrived, the jester dropped all pretenses of doing chaotic good deeds. He did not merely watch the empire burn, he actively pushed the desperate, corrupted ruler directly into the chthonic abyss. He wasn't some passive observer of history, He was the very active architect of his twin's immense suffering.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core twist of this entire mythos. The fall of this grand empire was not a tragic accident of history. No, it was a deliberate cosmic intervention. The true jester purposely orchestrated the utter destruction of the king's empire just to pull the strings of his Faustian downfall. The birth of what came next was entirely, 100%, by design. See, when the king was pushed into that abyss, his utter confusion and despair hardened. And from that, the spirit of negation was birthed. This new spirit is a manifestation of permanent bitterness. But crucially, this dark entity is the absolutely necessary catalyst meant to keep the universe's cycle of chaos and order in perfect balance. The jester knew that engineering his twin's suffering was the literal only way to forge this essential cosmic counterweight. By orchestrating this cataclysm from the shadows, the spirit of becoming did something both incredible and terrifying. He weaponized a mortal's tragedy into the ultimate engine of existential transformation. The internal spiritual rebirth of the entire universe demanded this exact, precise ruin.
Which leads us perfectly into our final section, the eternal recurrence, 1,000-year hibernation.
Let's trace this timeline for a second and see how this devastation echoes across centuries. We start at year 0 with the cataclysmic downfall and the birth of the spirit of negation. As the sovereign enters this dark 1,000-year hibernation, the ripples of his tragedy start to spread. Through the lens of philology, the study of how these ancient warnings evolve through language, we see that by year 100, the jester's hidden deeds secretly begin to inspire diverse human folklore all over the globe. Fast forward to year 500, and an unyielding lineage of inherited heroic tragedy firmly takes root in our texts. And finally, by year 1000, we witness the eternal recurrence of human suffering. This cycle of ruin and rebirth, it's permanent.
So, what should we really take away from this grim Gothic fable? Well, the lessons are deeply, deeply rooted in Nietzschean philosophy. First, true spiritual growth simply cannot happen in comfort. It absolutely demands intense friction. Second, the terrifying crucible of absolute ruin is required to keep chaos and order in perfect cosmic balance. Third, our very human folklore is directly inspired by these hidden cosmic machinations. And finally, this cycle of ruin and rebirth isn't just a one-and-done event. It is eternal.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a rather provocative thought. If this lore holds a mirror up to our own existence, and if true spiritual balance actually requires the terrifying crucible of absolute ruin, who is secretly orchestrating your friction? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you, and beware the rot beneath the green.